In 1519, a Spanish soldier stepped off a stone causeway and into a city that made no sense to him. The streets were swept clean before dawn. The air smelled of smoke and flowers, not filth. The people were bathed, groomed, and dressed in spotless cloth. He had not washed in 4 months. His wool was crawling with lice, and he was standing in a place cleaner than any city in Spain. Tenochtitlan, 250,000 people, and not one European capital could match it. The men who conquered this city also buried its story. Tonight we are digging it back up. Which civilization was actually cleaner? Now before we dive in, tap that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Stay with us because things are about to take a surprising turn. We are not going to the movies for this. We are going to the people who were actually there. Bernal Díaz del Castillo marched with Cortes and wrote down what he saw with his own eyes decades later, when the memory was still sharp enough to cut. Bernardino de Sahagún spent 60 years compiling the Florentine Codex, working side by side with Nahua elders who dictated their knowledge in their own language so it would survive. The Codex Mendoza, Diego Duran, the letters Cortes himself sent to King Charles V, written from the field in his own hand. And the ground beneath modern Mexico City, where every excavation at Templo Mayor and Tlatelolco keeps confirming what the old chronicles described. These are the sources, not the Victorian retellings, not the Hollywood version with blood and feathers and nothing else. The testimony left by people who stood in those streets and struggled to describe what they were seeing. Tenochtitlan in 1519 was larger than Seville, larger than London, larger than Paris. It sat on a lake, connected to the mainland by 3 great causeways, fed by twin aqueducts from the springs at Chapultepec. It ran on rules that would stun a modern city planner, and nearly everything about its hygiene was systematically erased from the story the conquerors told afterward. That is the world we are stepping into tonight. Let us start at the bottom and work our way up. Number 25. Flower-scented breath. The Aztec elite chewed a gum called tzictli. It came from the sap of the sapodilla tree, harvested from the bark in sticky white strips. You could smell it on a person before they spoke. Sahagún recorded this in Book 10 of the Florentine Codex. It cleaned the teeth, it sweetened the breath. But there was a strict social rule attached. A grown man chewing gum in public was considered vulgar, a display of vanity beneath his dignity. It was tolerated in private and among women, but never shown openly by a man of standing. The concern for clean breath was expected. The visible effort was not. In the same century, across the Atlantic, European oral hygiene was functionally non-existent for ordinary people. A rotten mouth was normal in Madrid. In Tenochtitlan, it was a mark of shame. We are at the bottom of this list, and the gap is already open. Number 24. Toothbrushes 3 centuries early. Aztecs cleaned their teeth with mixtures of crushed charcoal and fine salt, applied with cloth or with the frayed ends of chewed sticks. Sahagún documented specific recipes handed down through generations. The toothbrush, as Europeans would know, it did not arrive until the late 1700s. 300 years later. Archaeological work at the Tlatelolco excavation site has found dental health in Aztec-era populations that continues to surprise modern researchers. Worn teeth from coarse ground maize, certainly, but remarkably low rates of the decay and gum disease that ravaged European mouths of the same period. These were not people neglecting their mouths. They had a system and a set of tools. Both worked, and both predated anything in Europe by centuries. Number 23. The Temazcal. Every household compound had one, or had reliable access to one close by. A low structure of stone or adobe, just large enough for a few people to sit inside, heated by volcanic rocks pulled from the fire. Water poured over them to create thick, heavy steam. Sahagún described its use for daily cleanliness, for recovery after the ordeal of childbirth, for treating fevers, aching joints, congested breathing, and muscle pain from long days of physical labor in the fields and on the lake. Duran confirmed that the temazcal was as common in an Aztec neighborhood as a cooking hearth. It was not a luxury reserved for nobles. It was as basic to daily Aztec life as washing your hands before a meal. Meanwhile, in Europe, public bathhouses had been shuttered after the plague outbreaks of the 1300s. Most never reopened. The continent that would conquer the Aztecs had largely abandoned bathing. The Aztecs had not. Number 22. 2 baths a day. Moctezuma II bathed twice daily. Díaz del Castillo noted this with something close to disbelief in his chronicle. Fresh garments every time. Fresh water. Fresh cloths. The Florentine Codex records that ordinary Aztecs bathed at minimum once a day during warm weather, and frequently in cooler months as well. Compare that with the famous claim about Queen Isabella of Castile, who reportedly boasted that she had bathed only twice in her entire life, once at birth and once on the eve of her wedding. Whether that story is perfectly accurate or slightly polished by time, the cultural gulf it reveals is documented and real. One civilization considered daily bathing essential. The other considered it dangerous. The question I planted at the start is not getting any easier to dodge. Number 21. Soap from a root. The amole root, a species of agave common in the hills around the Valley of Mexico, was pounded on a flat stone and mixed with water to produce a genuine lather. Sahagún recorded the preparation in careful detail. It washed the body, the hair, and clothing. The saponins in agave produce real cleansing foam with actual grease-cutting power. Modern chemists have confirmed what Aztec washerwomen already knew. This was not a primitive substitute for soap. It was soap made from a plant, available to anyone who could walk into the hills and dig up a root. They did not need to import it from a distant port. They did not need to render animal fat. The land provided it, and they had been using it for generations before any Spaniard arrived. Number 20. Deodorant from the garden. Sahagún and other chroniclers recorded that Aztecs applied pastes made from ground herbs and mineral compounds under the arms and across the skin to prevent and mask body odor. Specific plants are named directly in the codices, ingredients that grew in the kitchen gardens and hillsides around every Aztec town. Body odor was not shrugged off as a natural fact of life. It was treated as a social failing, a signal that a person had allowed their personal standards to collapse. The Nahuatl language had sharp words for a person who smelled foul, and none of them were kind. A man who neglected his body was not simply unpleasant. He was a disgrace to his family and his neighborhood. The Spanish soldiers arriving on the coast in 1519 had no equivalent practice, no herbal paste, no mineral preparation, no cultural expectation of freshness, no concern at all. And the question I asked at the beginning, which civilization was cleaner, is starting to feel less like a question and more like a verdict already delivered. But we are only at number 20. Number 19. Clean garments as social law. Clothing was washed regularly using amole root and beaten against smooth stones at designated washing areas along the canals and lake shores of Tenochtitlan. The women who did this work gathered in groups at dawn, and the sound of wet cotton striking stone carried across the water before the market opened. The Codex Mendoza depicts brilliantly dyed, spotless garments as direct markers of a person's social rank and personal honor. A soiled garment was not merely unpleasant. It was a mark of public disgrace that could cost a merchant his standing in the market and a nobleman his reputation at court. In European courts of the same era, outer garments were almost never washed. The elaborate doublets and gowns of the Spanish and English courts were worn for months without cleaning. Perfume was applied over the stench rather than the stench being removed. Only the underlinens were laundered with any regularity. A nobleman in Madrid might wear a coat until it was stiff with old grime and still be considered perfectly well-dressed. An Aztec merchant wearing a stained cloak would have lost standing in the marketplace by noon. Number 18. The smoke that cleaned the air. Copal resin was burned constantly throughout Tenochtitlan, in homes, in temples, in the marketplace, in every public space. The smoke carried a sharp, sweet scent that every Spanish chronicler noticed the moment they entered the city. The burning was partly religious, but it was also practical fumigation on a city-wide scale. Modern laboratory analysis has confirmed that copal smoke carries genuine antimicrobial compounds that reduce bacteria and fungal spores in enclosed spaces. It was not just fragrant, it was genuinely functional. The air of Tenochtitlan smelled of copal and flowers. The air of a European city in 1519 smelled of open sewage, rotting food, tannery runoff, and unwashed bodies packed into streets with no drainage. The difference hit the Spanish like a wall. Number 17. Public latrines and organized waste removal. Tenochtitlan had public latrines along the causeways and throughout the marketplace at Tlatelolco. Díaz del Castillo described them clearly. Human waste was collected by dedicated workers who paddled canoes along the canal routes on a daily schedule, gathering waste from public facilities and private homes alike, then transporting it out of the city to fertilize the chinampas, the floating gardens that fed the population. The canals themselves were kept clean by regular dredging. The entire system ran like clockwork, staffed and scheduled, serving a population of over 200,000 people. London in 1519 had nothing even faintly comparable. People emptied chamber pots from upper windows into the streets below, shouting a warning that came too late as often as not. The Thames was an open sewer that the city also used for drinking water. London would not build its first comprehensive sewer system until the work of Joseph Bazalgette in the 1860s, more than 300 years later. And even then, London served a city smaller than the one the Aztecs had kept clean 3 centuries before. Number 16. Nothing wasted. Human urine was collected in designated clay vessels placed at public points around the city and aged until the ammonia chemistry was right for industrial use. It was then carried to the textile dyeing workshops where it served as a mordant, a chemical fixative that locked brilliant colors into cotton and megui fiber cloth. It sounds harsh to modern ears, but it served 2 purposes at once. It removed a waste product from living spaces and converted it into a valuable industrial resource that the dye workers depended on for the vivid reds, blues, and yellows the Aztec textile trade was famous for. The same practice had existed in Roman fooleries 1,000 years earlier. But by 1519, post-Roman Europe had abandoned even that basic recycling loop. The Aztecs kept the cycle running. Their city produced almost nothing that was not captured, processed, and returned to productive use. In a time that tells us recycling is a modern invention, this entry deserves a long pause. Number 15. 1,000 sweepers before dawn. Tenochtitlan employed roughly 1,000 workers whose sole job was to sweep the streets clean every morning before the city woke. They worked in the dark, moving through the neighborhoods with brooms made from bundled reeds, clearing dust and debris from the stone roads before the first traders reached the market. Multiple Spanish chroniclers recorded this with undisguised amazement. The roads were swept smooth enough to walk barefoot without discomfort. Cortés himself, in his official letters to Charles V, described the cleanliness of the city he was planning to destroy. Think about that for a moment. The man who would level Tenochtitlan and bury its civilization admitted in his own hand in a letter to his king that it was cleaner than anything he had ever seen in his life. That sentence should have rewritten every textbook in the Western world. It never did. Number 14. Hair as a public signal. The Florentine Codex contains detailed instructions for washing, oiling, and styling hair using plant-based preparations that Sahagún recorded with obvious care. Women used avocado oil and herbal infusions to maintain shine and control. Men kept their hair cut and groomed according to their rank and occupation, with specific styles marking warriors, merchants, and priests as distinct social classes. Unkempt hair on an ordinary adult Aztec was a public signal of mourning, penance, or madness. It was never simply a personal choice. Priests were the sole exception. Their matted, blood-crusted hair was a deliberate and extreme religious marker. The Spanish found it horrifying precisely because it broke the Aztec cultural norm, not because it matched it. The disgust the chroniclers recorded proves the rule they were witnessing. Clean, carefully groomed hair was the universal baseline for every citizen. The question we planted at the top of this video is tightening with every entry we count. Number 13. Hygiene as medicine. Aztec healers, the Tenochtitlan, prescribed baths, temazcal steam sessions, herbal washes, and topical plant preparations as frontline medicine for nearly every ailment they encountered. Sahagún cataloged hundreds of medicinal plants across the 12 books of the Florentine Codex, noting their preparation and their specific uses with the precision of a pharmacist. Wounds were washed and dressed with plant poultices. Fevers were treated with steam and cold water compresses. Skin infections were cleaned and treated with herbal pastes applied directly to the affected area. Hygiene and medicine were not separate disciplines in Aztec practice. They were the same thing. A sick person was bathed, steamed, and treated with botanical compounds as a unified protocol. In the very same decade, European physicians were still earnestly debating whether bathing might open the pores and allow plague to enter the body. One civilization treated illness with cleanliness as the first response. The other treated cleanliness itself as a medical risk. Let that comparison settle before we move on. Number 12. Childbirth in the steam. The temazcal was absolutely central to the care of mothers after delivery. Midwives, the tlamatquitecital, bathed both the mother and the newborn in the sweat bath using herbal infusions carefully prepared for postpartum recovery. They maintained strict cleanliness standards that Sahagún describes with real specificity in his sections on childbirth and infant care. The umbilical cord was cut with a clean obsidian blade. The mother was washed, steamed, and given herbal drinks to prevent fever. The infant was bathed immediately. The protocols were designed to reduce infection through methods that European obstetrics would not even begin to consider for another 300 years. The hands of the midwife were washed. The linens beneath the mother were clean. The water was heated fresh. A woman delivering a child in Tenochtitlan in 1519 was cleaner, better attended, and measurably safer from postpartum infection than a woman delivering in a London hospital ward in 1819, 3 full centuries later. That is not a small gap in knowledge. That is a civilizational chasm. Number 11. Twin aqueducts from the mountain. Tenochtitlan drew all of its fresh drinking and bathing water from the natural springs at Chapultepec through 2 parallel stone aqueducts, each running roughly 3 miles from the forested hillside to the beating heart of the island city. The channels were built of stone and lined with mortar, raised above the lake on causeways so the fresh water never mixed with the salt water below. They were built as twin channels for one brilliant reason. When one needed cleaning or repair, it could be shut down, while the other kept fresh water flowing to the city without interruption. No gap, no rationing, no crisis. Fresh spring water was maintained in total separation from the brackish, salty water of the surrounding lake. This was hydraulic engineering no city in Spain could match, and no city in England would match for centuries to come. Cortes described the system with admiration in his second letter to Charles V in 1520. He praised the engineering, and then his soldiers smashed the aqueducts during the siege to cut the water supply and force the city to its knees. Number 10. 60,000 people and a clean market. Díaz del Castillo estimated that 60,000 individual buyers and sellers passed through the great open-air market at Tlatelolco every single day. He compared it to the markets of Constantinople and Rome and said it surpassed them. The market had its own corps of dedicated sanitation workers who cleared waste throughout the trading hours. It had organized refuse removal by canoe. It had public latrines positioned for the enormous daily crowd. Food vendors operated under what appears to have been regular inspection by market judges, who also settled disputes and enforced standards. The logistical achievement of maintaining functional hygiene for 60,000 daily visitors in a single marketplace is staggering by any standard, ancient or modern. Most modern outdoor festivals and county fairs serving a fraction of that attendance cannot manage their sanitation half as well. The Spanish soldiers who walked those market aisles recognized the achievement immediately. They put it in the written record with open admiration. And then they tore the market apart stone by stone and never rebuilt it. Number 9. Flowers you carried for a reason. Aztec nobles and officials carried bouquets of fresh flowers and tightly bound bundles of aromatic herbs in their hands everywhere they walked through the city. This was not vanity and not mere decoration. In a dense urban environment of over 200,000 people, the flowers served as portable AIR fresheners, natural fumigants against foul smells, and immediate visible signals of social standing and personal cleanliness. The flower markets of Tenochtitlan were enormous, and the demand was daily, not seasonal. Sahagún and Duran both described this practice in close detail. When Moctezuma walked out along the Great Causeway to meet the approaching Spanish column for the first time, he held fresh flowers in his hands. Cortes held a sword, two civilizations meeting face to face on a stone road built over water. One smelled of marigolds and copal resin. The other smelled of rusted iron, old leather, and 4 months of sweat ground into unwashed wool. The contrast was unmistakable, and it was recorded for all time by the men who were carrying the swords. Number 8. Wash your hands or leave the table. Aztec dining customs required hand washing before and after every meal without exception. Servants brought individual basins of clean water and fresh cotton cloths to each person at the table, regardless of whether the meal was a formal feast or an ordinary family supper. Sahagún and Díaz both describe this ritual in their accounts of Aztec dining, and neither treats it as remarkable because it was simply what happened at every meal in every household. In the same century across the ocean, European diners reached into shared wooden bowls with unwashed fingers. They passed heavy cups from mouth to mouth around the table. They tore bread with hands that had touched horses, money, and other people's sores that same afternoon. They wiped meat grease on tablecloths or their own sleeves without a thought. The table fork had barely appeared in Italy and was openly mocked as a ridiculous foreign affectation. It would not reach common use in England for another century. The Aztecs were washing their hands at every meal, while the most powerful courts in Europe were still eating with bare, unwashed fists. Number 7. Botanical insect repellent. Tenochtitlan sat on a lake. The lake was ringed by marshland, thick with reeds and standing water. Mosquitoes were not a minor annoyance in that environment. They were a constant, swarming, and dangerous disease vector that threatened every person in the basin, from the king to the bummer on the Chinampas. The codices document specific herbal preparations and mineral body paints that functioned as effective insect repellent, traditional knowledge refined through generations of careful observation and passed from parent to child as a matter of practical survival. The Aztecs had developed working botanical defenses against the insects that carried the worst of the tropical fevers. The Spanish had absolutely nothing comparable, no formula, no knowledge, no defense, not even an understanding of what the mosquitoes were actually doing to them. Malaria and other mosquito-borne diseases would devastate colonial European populations across the entire American continent for the next 300 years. The people the conquerors dismissed as primitive savages had quietly solved a problem the conquerors could not even properly identify, let alone begin to treat. Number 6. The closed loop. Remember this one. Human waste, food scraps, organic refuse, and mud dredged from the canals were collected daily by canoe and transported to the Chinampas, the floating gardens surrounding the city. The waste became rich fertilizer. The crops that grew on those gardens fed the city. The waste from the city then fed the gardens, a perfect circle. A closed-loop sanitation and food production system serving 250,000 people. No European city had anything comparable. Not Rome at its height, not Paris, not London. This is not the most dramatic entry on this list, but when we reach the end, I believe it is the most important of all 25. Hold on to it. We are coming back. Number 5. Drunkenness as a hygiene offense. Under Aztec law, public intoxication by a young adult was not a fine or a warning. It was punishable by death. The penalty was enforced, and the fear of it was real. Older citizens who had earned the privilege through age were permitted to drink pulque in controlled amounts and in appropriate settings. But even for them, public staggering and loss of composure was deeply shameful. The reasoning behind the severity was partly about civic order, but it was also directly about hygiene. A drunk could not maintain the daily bathing, grooming, and behavioral standards that Aztec society demanded of every citizen regardless of station. Intoxication led to filth. Filth led to disgrace. And disgrace was not just personal, it fell on the family and the neighborhood. No equivalent law or custom existed anywhere in Europe where public drunkenness was an unremarkable nightly constant in every city, every tavern, and every royal court from Lisbon to London. Number 4. The destruction of everything that worked. In August of 1521, after a siege lasting 75 days, the Spanish and their allies broke through the last defenses of Tenochtitlan. They did not merely occupy the city, they demolished it. They smashed the twin aqueducts from Chapultepec that had carried clean mountain water for generations. They filled in the great canals with rubble and broken stone until the waterways that had moved waste, food, and people went silent. They tore down the Temazcali bathhouses neighborhood by neighborhood. They dismantled the waste collection canoe routes that had kept the city clean for generations. Over the following decades, they drained and filled the lake itself. On top of the ruins, they built Mexico City without the sanitation infrastructure the old city had perfected. Within a generation, the new city was plagued by catastrophic flooding, open sewage, and epidemic disease that the Aztec capital had managed for centuries. The conquerors replaced one of the cleanest cities in the world with one of the most troubled. The crises they created persisted for 500 years. This is not interpretation. It is the archaeological and historical record, confirmed by every major dig at Templo Mayor since 1978. Number 3. Europe in 1519. In the same year Cortés landed on the coast of Mexico, London had open sewers running through its principal streets. Butchers dumped blood and offal directly into the Thames, the same river the city drew its drinking water from. The stench in summer was unbearable. Paris was no better. Human waste was thrown into the Seine and left to rot in the open gutters between buildings where children played and women drew water. The Spanish royal court, the very court that funded the conquest, moved between palaces partly because each residence became too fouled by accumulated waste to inhabit after a few months. The public bathhouses of the medieval period had been closed after the Black Death and never rebuilt. No one tried. Plague, typhus, and dysentery were accepted as ordinary facts of city life. Europe was in a genuine and prolonged hygiene dark age. The Aztec Empire, at the exact same moment in history, was not. Set the two civilizations side by side in the same year, and the question I have been carrying since the first minute settles itself completely. But the answer is not the part that should trouble you. The part that should trouble you is what was done with that truth afterward. Number 2, what the chroniclers wrote and what history chose to bury. Díaz del Castillo described the cleanliness in his own hand. Cortés praised it in letters to his king. Sahagún documented it across 12 books compiled over 6 decades of painstaking work. López de Gomara recorded it. Duran confirmed it. The primary sources agree. Tenochtitlan was clean. Its people were groomed. Its infrastructure was generations ahead of Europe. None of this was hidden. It was written down in plain language by men who were there, but the story that survived into the school books was a different one entirely. The narrative that justified conquest needed a savage, a primitive, a people in need of civilizing and Christian salvation. So the hygiene record was never disputed. It was simply set aside, left out of the summaries, omitted from the curricula, absent from the movies. Victorian historians sorted the world into civilized and primitive and placed the Aztecs firmly on the wrong side of that line, using criteria the documentary evidence flatly contradicted. Hollywood inherited that framework without question and without examination. The sacrificial blood made the movie poster. The aqueducts and the swept streets and the clean garments did not. The myth was not an accident of incomplete scholarship. It was built deliberately by generations of people who needed it to be true. Number 1. Moctezuma's mourning. He rose before the sun. Fresh garments were laid out beside him, garments that had never been worn before and would never be worn by him again. Attendants brought basins of heated water and clean cotton cloths. His hands were washed first, then his face, then his entire body, carefully and thoroughly. Copal resin was lit in clay burners around the chamber until the air grew thick with its sharp, sweet, purifying smoke. Fresh bouquets of marigolds and herbs were placed in his hands. Then came the temazcal, the low stone room with the door pulled shut, the volcanic rocks pulled from the fire with wooden tongs and set hissing on the floor. Water poured slowly over the stones until the steam rose and filled the space. He sat in the wet heat and the silence. He emerged and was dried and dressed again in fresh garments once more. Food was brought on clean woven mats, hands washed before eating. hands washed again after. A second full bath before the afternoon shadows grew long. This was not vanity. This was protocol, the daily hygiene ritual of the ruler of the cleanest major city on earth in 1519. He performed it every day with a discipline no European monarch of his century could have matched or understood. Sahagún recorded every step of it. Diaz confirmed what he witnessed with his own astonished eyes. The man the Spanish would imprison in his own palace, parade before his own people, and ultimately see killed in the chaos they created, maintained himself with more care and more dignity than any crowned king in all of Christendom. That is not legend, that is not romantic myth, that is the sworn and documented testimony of the very men who destroyed him. So here is my answer to the question I asked at the start. Which civilization was cleaner? It was not close. Not by any honest measure applied to any honest source. The Aztec Empire was cleaner than every European capital of its era, and the evidence across all 25 of these entries is not ambiguous. It is not a matter of interpretation. It is the documented consensus of the men who were there. But the real answer is not number 1. It is number 6. The closed loop. The remarkable thing was never that Moctezuma bathed twice a day. Any king with enough servants can manage a personal ritual. The remarkable thing was that a city of 250,000 ordinary people had solved urban sanitation, waste recycling, clean water delivery, and agricultural reuse as one integrated system, functioning every day, 300 years before London would even attempt the problem. That was not the achievement of one powerful man with attendants. That was the achievement of a civilization working across generations to build something that served everyone. And when the Spanish tore it down in 1521, they did not replace it. They could not. They did not understand what they were looking at. They smashed the aqueducts, filled in the canals, drained the lake, and built a colonial capital that flooded catastrophically for the next 500 years. The conquerors stood in the most advanced urban hygiene system in the world and saw nothing worth saving. Today, roughly 2 billion people on this planet still lack access to safely managed sanitation and clean water. The engineers and the aid workers and the governments wrestling with that crisis today are trying to solve a problem that a civilization on a lake in Mexico had already solved 5 centuries ago. The next time you turn on a faucet and clean water flows out without a second thought, remember that. Remember who built it first. And remember that the men who burned their books and leveled their city and erased their name from the story we tell our children could not have told you the last time they bathed. Which truth surprised you most? Tell me below. And if you want the real story behind another piece of history the conquerors tried to bury, the next one is already waiting for you.